Hey everyone, Jack here. Today I'm going to talk about the SAT and the ACT, which to take, how this all works. I'm not going to bury the lead here. If you have a high schooler who is either a sophomore right now or a junior, this is going to be really important because I'm going to strongly encourage you as the parent to have your child take one real live SAT and one real live ACT prior to engaging in full-on studying. Yes, that's right. I'm going to encourage you to have your high schooler take one test of each before really diving in. Even if they get a 0 on that test, they just don't have to submit it. It's fine. But the goal is to establish a baseline to move forward. So I'll kind of come back to that in the back half of this video. But right now I actually want to first go through the differences between the two tests. Before I dive into that, I want to be very clear. Of all colleges in the United States, there is zero preference at the collegiate level between the SAT or ACT. Zero. I'm from Boston originally. There's a strong East Coast bias. I remember hearing growing up saying, don't colleges really prefer the SAT? No. That is false. That is wrong. Colleges do not care which test a student submits. And again, these days actually, colleges are test optional, so you technically don't have to. But, like I've said in past videos, if a student scores well, it is still the second most important factor in college admissions behind high school grades. So I think it's important to actually have a method to not just study for the test, but actually choose which test your child should study. And that's really what I want to focus on here, is the choosing aspect. So let's dive into the two tests. I'm actually going to highlight a resource that I found. I looked at a lot of different resources who listed the differences between the tests, and I've made these resources myself. But I thought that this one was really, really thoughtful and brought up some great differences. So this is the one I'm going to highlight. I'm going to link to this in the chat so you can open it up below. Shout out to KD College Prep. Always love to shout out other college coaches in the industry. I think are doing a great job. So I'm going to scroll through and highlight what I think are the most important differences. There are 18 listed here. I'm not going to go through all of them. If you want, you can open up this resource and go through each of them. I'm going to talk through the ones I think are the most important and why I think it's absolutely critical that a student establish which test is the best fit for them. Let's go through it. This is the first chart that I want to show. Popularity varies by state. I know I have viewers all over the country, and so I think this is really important. Again, I grew up here in Massachusetts, a very popular SAT state. I live here right now in Colorado, a popular SAT state. For the most part, as you can see, the SAT seems to be more popular on the coasts and the ACT in the middle of the country. But again, to be clear, SATs and ACTs are offered in every state across the country. So just because you live in a state where there's a preference does not mean that needs to be your test. I think that's really important. Now, format, slightly different. All right. One thing I want to highlight here, the ACT has a science section. The SAT has no science section. In general, also, I'll let you know that typically the ACT seems to be more time intensive, and the SAT is slightly less time intensive, although others may tell you differently. But that seemed to be the common trend. Lastly, here as I'm making this in 2022, the ACT is the only test now with an essay. The SAT used to have one and they got rid of it. All right, I'm going to scroll through each of these. Again, you can look into these in detail if you want. I'm going to highlight what I think are the most important aspects. Mentioned, ACT has a science section. Now, I'm going to pause here for a second. The reason I am bringing up these differences is because 90 to 95% of students I've coached over the last 12 and a half years have had a strong affinity towards one test or the other, the SAT or ACT. Reasons like this can be why. If a student has a strong science mind, more STEM oriented, perhaps the ACT could be a fit. Not necessarily, But the point is to establish that baseline early. Which test does your child have a strong affinity towards? Because you're starting at a higher base level. Okay? If your child has a base level of an ACT here and an SAT here, it is silly to have that student start studying here to try to bring it up. Why would you not start here? Try to bring up your score. That's really the purpose of this, is trying to teach you those differences. So again, I can harness you with the power to go back to your high schooler and say, let's have a plan moving forward to try to find which test is the best fit for you. This is an important one. Just from answer format, the SAT recently adopted grid-ins. You can see about 22% of questions are this grid-in format. It's less about the grid-in and more about the fact that the formats of the tests are just slightly different. The SAT and ACT in general are not testing a child's ability to understand knowledge. They're testing a child's ability to take a test. That's an important distinction. So when a child goes all in on a test, they're going to start to understand the nuances, the format. They're going to get better. Just like anything that you practice, you'll get better at. And so again, it's important to start with that baseline of which format of a test does your child work with better. Okay, length of time. I went through this. The ACT slightly more time intensive, as you can see here, but in general, they're typically pretty even. Let's see, what do I want to go here? Yes, okay, test dates. I'm going to move my face over here. Test dates, as you can see, slightly different testing windows. The ACT and SAT in general, on a pretty regular cadence. I actually got asked this yesterday by a parent who did not know that the SAT and ACT were offered throughout the year. Yes, they're offered throughout the year in different months. So it's pretty easy, when I make the recommendation to get a baseline score of each, to take a live test. The most that you'll ever skip is 1 month. So in a 2-month period, it's guaranteed, based on this, that you can take one real live SAT and one real live ACT. All right, now, I've got a bonus for you. If you made it this far, I want to tell you, while my recommendation is to take one real live SAT and one real live ACT, sometimes I understand that's not possible. Also, that costs money. And so I'm going to link to this as well. These are my preferred partners. I have personally vetted each resource who is on here, and I'm going to put the link in the chat of the video. Feel free to utilize it if you would like. You might recognize several names who I've had on webinars, etc. I do want to highlight an option. Signet Education. They offer practice tests. Thoughtful, thorough practice tests. If a student is not able to pay for and sit for a real live SAT and real live ACT to get a baseline, reach out to Signet. They have free practice tests that a student can take. Sure, a student could also do this on their own, but here's what I've seen. Many students say, yep, I can simulate a practice environment in my bedroom or in the high school, and they just can't. At the end of the day, this thing then becomes a distraction, and they're not simulating a real test environment, which of course is going to give a faulty baseline. That's why I would say over 50% of my students take me up on it, and they actually schedule a real live test for each to get that baseline. Once you get that baseline, it's important to know how to compare the two resources. And so I'm going to show you what I'm going to Google here. ACT, SAT, concordance tables. You can go. You can find concordance tables. What they do is they actually list SAT scores, ACT scores for you to be able to compare them. Here you go. I'll also link to this in the chat as well. So, I hope that this was a helpful video. I hope you utilize these preferred partners. Feel free to give them a go. Reach out once your child has a baseline and they say, based on this, I have a score for my SAT and ACT. I'm going all in on this test. They're basically one of 3 methods that your child can use to actually go all in, study, and improve their score. Method number 1, the easiest, the cheapest, but requires some serious motivation from the student, and that is self-study. If you'd like my favorite self-study books, shoot me an email, jack@delahayeconsulting.com. I can send over some of my favorites. It obviously varies, SAT, ACT, and honestly what you're looking for, digital, paperback, etc. But I'd be happy to make some recommendations for you. Number 2 is the kind of online group study method. Many of the programs shown here offer that. Feel free, you can go check it out. And if you want some more recommendations, feel free, you can email me as well. And I can give you some recommendations based on exactly what you're looking for. And then number 3, I can't really make a recommendation for, and that is in person, sitting at your kitchen table, one-on-one tutoring. That is obviously incredibly location specific, so I can't. But the process here is step 1. Understand which test your child has a stronger affinity towards, which test your child has a higher base level on. Then ignore the other test for the rest of time. Gone. Go all in on that one test. My students, by the way, about 50-50, SAT, ACT, truly. But if you ask them, they say, oh yeah, I liked this test better, I like this test better. Step 2, determine your study plan. Self-study, group study, or individual in-person tutoring. As you can imagine, the individual in-person tutoring is typically the most expensive. Self-study, least expensive, group study in the middle. If you want, you can utilize any of these resources. You can reach out if you want some more recommendations. I even put notes in here about all of these individuals. This is for you, free of charge. I have personally vetted each of these. I do not put any resources on here that I have not personally vetted. And then from there, the goal is simple. Work to improve your test score. A high schooler should act as if the standardized test is mandatory until at least fall of senior year. As you know, for most schools across the country, they're technically test optional. However, if a child scores well, it is still the second most important factor in college admissions. So it's important that a student at least acts as if it's mandatory only until the very last second senior year, in which case if they do not have a score that they think represents their academic abilities, then you can consider going the test optional approach. If you are interested in a resource to help you figure out what is that good score, Jack, CollegeSimply.com. I will also link in the chat. Oh, that's interesting. It didn't work. It's at Vanderbilt. CollegeSimply.com. You can go and search for any school, and you can find what their admissions policies are. My alma mater, Vanderbilt, you can click admissions right here, and you can actually see their middle 50% range. This should be the minimum target you're looking at to submit your score. So at Vanderbilt, if your child is unable to get a 1470 by the time they reach senior fall, my recommendation, my strong recommendation, if you were one of my students in my program, would be not to submit your score unless you get that. On the ACT front, it would be not to submit your score unless you get that. This is the middle 50% range. You can look this up for any school to actually find what an eventual target is. So that is it for this. I will link to each of these resources in the description below. And until next time, have a good one. Cheers.